Fisher between 2004 and 2016. This is just a staggering amount of awesome material by one of my favorite cultural theorists, writers, philosophers out there. Are unfortunately no longer out there. Today we're going to be reading a post Mark did for the Occupied Times called Good for Nothing. I do want to say before I start reading this that it does mention suicide, so if that would put you in a bad place, if talking about depression would put you in a bad place, just a warning about that. Otherwise, I find this to be a great read. So let's jump into Good for Nothing by K-Punk/Mark Fisher. I've suffered from depression intermittently since I was a teenager. Some of these episodes have been highly debilitating, resulting in self-harm, withdrawal, where I would spend months on end in my own room, only venturing out to sign on or to buy the minimal amounts of food I was consuming, and time spent on psychiatric wards. I wouldn't say I've recovered from the condition, but I'm pleased to say that both the incidences and the severity of depressive episodes have greatly lessened in recent years. Partly, that is a consequence of changes in my life situation, but it's also to do with coming to a different understanding of my depression and what has caused it. I offer up my own experiences of mental distress, not because I think they're anything special or unique, but in support of the claim that many forms of depression are best understood and best combated through frames that are impersonal and political, rather than individual and psychological. Writing about one's own depression is difficult. Depression is partly constituted by a sneering inner voice which accuses you of self-indulgence. You aren't depressed, you're just feeling sorry for yourself. Pull yourself together. And this voice is liable to be triggered by going public about the condition. Of course, this voice isn't an inner voice at all. It is the internalized expression of actual social forces. Some of which have a vested interest in denying any connection between depression and politics. My depression was always tied up with the conviction that I was literally good for nothing. I spent most of my life, up to the age of 30, believing that I would never work. In my 20s, I drifted between postgraduate study, periods of unemployment, and temporary jobs. In each of these roles, I felt I didn't really belong. In postgraduate study, because I was a dilettante who had somehow faked his way through, not a proper scholar. In unemployment, because I wasn't really unemployed like those who were honestly seeking work, but a shirker. And in temporary jobs, because I felt I was performing incompetently. And in any case, I didn't really belong in these office or factory jobs, not because I was too good for them, but very much to the contrary, because I was overeducated and useless. of such feelings of inferiority. Social power. The form of social power that had most effect on me was class power. Although, of course, gender, race, and other forms of oppression work by producing the same sense of ontological inferiority, which is best expressed in exactly the thought I articulated above, that one is not the kind of person who can fulfill roles which are earmarked for the dominant group. On the urging of one of the readers of my book, Capitalist Realism, I started to investigate the work of David Smale. Smale, a therapist, but one who makes the question of power central to his practice, confirmed the hypotheses about depression that I had stumbled towards. In his crucial book, The Origins of Unhappiness, Smale describes how the marks of class are designed to be indelible. For those who from birth are taught to think of themselves as lesser, the acquisition of qualifications or wealth will seldom be sufficient to erase the primordial sense of worthlessness that marks them so early in his life. Someone who moves out of the social sphere they are supposed to occupy is always in danger of being overcome by feelings of vertigo, panic, and horror. Quote, isolated, cut off, surrounded by a hostile space, you are suddenly without connections, without stability, with nothing to hold you upright or in place. A dizzying, sickening unreality takes possession of you. You are threatened by a complete loss of identity, a sense of utter fraudulence. You have no right to be here, now, inhabiting this body, dressed in this way. You are a nothing, and nothing is quite literally what you feel you are about to become. For some time now, one of the most successful tactics of the ruling class has been responsibilization. Each individual member of the subordinate class is encouraged into feeling that they are property. Take that paragraph from the top. For some time now, one of the most successful tactics of the ruling class has been responsibilization. Each individual member of the subordinate class is encouraged into feeling that their poverty, lack of opportunities, or unemployment is their fault and their fault alone. Individuals will blame themselves rather than social structures, which in any case they have been induced into believing do not really exist. They are just excuses called upon by the weak, what Smale calls magical voluntarism, the belief that it is within every individual's power to make themselves whatever they want to be, is the dominant ideology and unofficial religion of contemporary capitalist society, pushed by reality TV experts and business gurus as much as by politicians. Magical voluntarism is both an effect and a cause of the currently historically low level of class consciousness. It is the flip side of depression, whose underlying conviction is that we are all uniquely responsible for our own misery and therefore deserve it. A particularly vicious double bind is imposed on the long-term unemployed in the UK now, a population that has all its life been sent the message that it is good for nothing. A particularly vicious double bind is imposed on the long-term unemployed in the UK now. A population that has all its life been sent the message that it is good for nothing is simultaneously told that it can do anything it wants to do. We must understand the fatalistic submission of the UK's population to austerity as the consequence of a deliberately cultivated depression. This depression is manifested in the acceptance that things will get worse for all but a small elite, that we are lucky to have a job at all, so we shouldn't expect wages to keep pace with inflation, that we cannot afford the collective provision of the welfare state. Collective depression is the result of the ruling class project of resubordination. For some time now, we have increasingly accepted the idea that we are not the kind of people who can act. This is not a failure of will any more than an individual depressed This isn't a failure of will any more than an individual depressed person can snap themselves out of it by pulling their socks up.